Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. The drama continues ahead of 2026. Red Bull and Audi have been thrown into this engine cheating discussion, and you might think that means Red Bull are in for a pretty good year when it comes to their engine performance, but that is not the story coming out of the Red Bull camp today. One of their top guys says if they're lucky, they might be second or third next season. And Raymond Vermeulen, and that's Verstappen's manager, he reckons it's going to be a difficult year for the four-time world champion. Could this be Max's last year at Red Bull if things go as we think they might be going on this evidence? Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Obviously the 23rd of January, that's when the Ferrari will be launched. We'll see if it's any good. We are 37 days away from, actually now 36 days away, from the start of testing in Barcelona. So just to keep this in mind, Barcelona testing at the end of January, 36 days away, is a 5-day test. On those 5 days, the teams will only be able to run on 3 of those days, weather permitting and stuff like that. They will choose the days where they think will be best. They'll be running cars, well, who knows what the liveries will even look like. Some teams, I think Williams will be having liveries, others may not necessarily, but it's all behind closed doors. We're not going to get to know anything official from that test, but I'm sure there will be a lot to discuss. And as we talked about over the last couple of days, many of the teams will be bringing mule cars effectively. Well, they're not going to call them mule cars. They're going to call them a Spec A car. So Ferrari have actually confirmed they will be doing this. Their car in Barcelona will effectively be there just to make sure the engine works, the active aero works, and that's about it. In terms of actual performance, they will leave that to bring a more upgraded car to the Bahrain test in the middle of February. This is what Vasseur says. Everyone he thinks will bring a Spec A car. We are not used to having 9 test days. So, as I say, it's a 5-day test in Barcelona. They can only run on 3 of those days. Then they've got 3 more days in Bahrain in early February, 3 more days in Bahrain in later February. Then we go to Melbourne. So, yeah, the last few years it's been 3-day tests. This is a 9-day test, as he says. It's an advantage over, let's say, previous years, but it's absolutely a rather different program to what they have had for some time. Ferrari are also playing things down on their ends. Like, I will say, this is the standard Ferrari playbook. If they've just had a very good / promising season, it's all guns blazing for the next year, right? Next year's our year. The car has unprecedented speed, or whatever they said a couple of years ago, and all of that. If they have a down year, then it's all about, you know, managing the expectations to a degree. But I think Fred Vasseur is doing a reasonable job of this, and he says, look, different approach. We're going to do our best. We don't know where the rivals are. We're hoping it goes to plan. So Ferrari are keeping expectations relatively muted for the upcoming season. I will say we've talked a lot about this engine drama over the last couple of days, and we're about to do it again. We've still not really heard anything about what Ferrari are up to, even about what Honda are potentially up to as well. But the way that Red Bull are talking, we might not necessarily get a Verstappen-Leclerc title fight that many people have been looking forward to for some time. May happen at some point. Possibly, maybe even probably, not going to be 2026. So let's get back into all this engine-related drama. So the big rumour over the last couple of days has been that Mercedes high-performance powertrains and potentially 1 or 2 others are exploiting a, frankly, very obvious loophole whereby the compression ratio in the cylinders of the engine is mandated to be 16:1, but the regulations say that that will be tested at ambient temperatures. So if you can find a way to increase that while the engine is actually operational, that will give you more bang for your buck. Now, as I say, this seems pretty obvious, right? Like, that's literally what the regulations say. It would be surprising if some teams weren't at least looking at it. The reason why this has been controversial is that some teams seem to think Mercedes are doing this, but the initial rumor was, okay, well, how? And if it's by thermal expansion purely, most engineers seem to think it's not possible to generate a 16:1 up to 18:1 compression purely by thermal deformation. So either there's something else going on, or Mercedes actually aren't doing this. The other teams are simply talking about it to get Mercedes under the spotlights because they fear that Mercedes will have the strongest power unit next season. It's also worth keeping in mind, if Mercedes have found this trick, that's 4 teams that advantage from it. Mercedes, McLaren, Williams and Alpine. And if other teams are doing the trick as well, then in terms of a decision to be made on this, there won't be too many teams to go against it. And that is especially relevant because we have another name thrown into the ring, but also we have a meeting tomorrow where a decision will apparently be made. So rumour has it, according to Motorsport Italia, that Audi could have done something similar as well. So Mercedes, Red Bull, those have been the chief manufacturers, and look, that would already put us over half of the teams, right? Mercedes have 4 teams under their domain, Red Bull have 2 with Racing Bulls as well, so that's already 6 teams out of the 11 that might be doing something. Now, the way this article describes it is using combustion engine to generate energy. We'll see how, of course, like, that's pretty obvious, right? But I guess it means deployment for the battery and all this. So there's a few nuances here. It's not necessarily just about the compression ratio, but it's also to do with the MGUK, the energy harvesting, and all of the massive complication that these regulations will explore. But if Audi are also not exactly in the same position, but if they're on the same side of the fence in this conversation, then it gets very interesting when it comes to, well, that's now 7 teams. And 3 of the engine manufacturers, with only Honda, with Aston Martin, and then Ferrari, with Haas and with Cadillac, on the other side of that conversation. So things are going to get very tasty tomorrow, especially when there's going to be a meeting on it. Breaking news, the FIA will meet with teams tomorrow to clarify the controversy. As we've said over the last few days, even if a team is doing this or is getting caught doing this, and right now we simply don't know how that would even happen or believe that that could easily be identified. In addition, you've then got to find a solution that works, and when, as I say, you've got the majority of manufacturers and the majority of teams on one side of that conversation, it's going to be a rather challenging thing to argue. So that's a conversation probably for tomorrow. The other development, though, is, okay, what about Red Bull? Because, look, everyone has expected Mercedes to have the best power unit next year. They've been talking about it for ages. That's been the general consensus. Maybe Ferrari can get close. Maybe they'll be right up there. Who knows about Honda? We know that reliability is going to be a crucial factor next year as well, which it hasn't been in Formula 1 now for quite some time. But look, Mercedes' best power unit, who's shocked at the end of the day if it is indeed the strongest? The question really is, okay, where do McLaren sit with respect to Mercedes as a result? What about the other 2, Williams and Alpine? And where can anyone else slot in up and down the grid either? Because, as I say, reliability is going to vary, I think, quite drastically next year between the better power unit manufacturers and the weaker ones. Could that be Red Bull powertrains, or what about Audi? Now, there's been lots of talk. It wasn't long ago that there were articles posted by the guys at Formula Races that basically said, look, Honda are the team to look out for. They're cooking a good engine for 2026. Now there's discussion that actually maybe Audi or Red Bull could take some other teams by surprise. Laura McKee says that Red Bull's engine department is already 600 personnel. So they're definitely all guns blazing when it comes to this. But as we know, Christian Horner, who really set this whole train in motion, said that if Red Bull were to be stronger than Mercedes next year, that would be embarrassing, right? So there is a feeling from Red Bull that they're not expecting miracles from their engine department next year. We know they've signed lots of rivals. That may be where they got their ideas from about this compression ratio. Who really knows? What we do know is that the retirement rate in Formula 1 has gone down drastically over the last couple of decades. I mean, look, this line does not go back pre-2000. This is from the race. If you go back to the 80s, in the turbo era, wow, we had some serious numbers. But you can see a general trend over the last few years in the downward direction, right? There's a clear negative correlation here between time passing and reliability, or let's just say percentage retirement rate. It goes down drastically in the early 2000s from near enough 40%. Then in the 2020, 2021, you're talking, I mean, this is retirement rate full stop, right? So this is not just engine mechanical related retirements, but, and even assuming that crashes and all of that happen at the same frequency, the level of mechanical retirement has gone down incredibly drastically. There was a little uptick in 2022, the first year of the new regulations. Since then, it's been further down, and it's now the lowest it has ever been, with pretty much 10% of the time cars will retire from races, and it's lower than that when you consider what reliability looks like. Yeah, there were a couple of hiccups this season. Antonelli, obviously Norris very notably. Even Alonso didn't he have an issue back in Monaco, was it? So, a few power unit problems. There's plenty of others as well. Alpine run into problems every so often. The Ferrari has not been perfect. But look, the reality is pretty much all the power units in the last few years have been similar in performance and in reliability. All very reliable, all very strong, apart from Alpine. It is what it is. That's not always been the case, and that will likely not be the case again next year. So that is probably the key discussion to have here when we go on to talk about the situation at Red Bull. Is that, yes, engine power, internal combustion engine power, the quality of the electrical deployment, the quality of the MGUK to recharge some of that energy and to store it in the battery. That's where Honda have been strong over the last few years. It's in the hybrid elements, the battery deployment and all of that. If they're still strong there, that gives them something to work with. But if Mercedes have the strongest combustion engine, that also is going to be an advantage for them too. So there's all that happening, but the integration between the two of them and what that means for reliability, because look, I'm not expecting this number to be this low next year, right? Like, there will be a spike. I mean, we can be pretty sure when regulation changes happen, there tends to be a spike. 2014, okay, it's not a massive jump, but there is a notable spike there for that first year. So Oliver Mintzlaff, who's a key figure at Red Bull, head of the team over there, and let's be honest, also one of the key figures behind what has happened over the last couple of years now, it feels like, really the last 6 months, with Horner and certainly with Helmut Marko as well. Helmut Marko even implied that he felt somewhat backstabbed because Marko basically said when Mateschitz died, Horner set about his mission to take over the team in its entirety, cozied up to Yovidya and the Thai side. Marko was not going to let that happen to the Austrian side of the business, defended the Austrian side of Red Bull to the hilt, had an absolute war with Horner behind the scenes, won the war. Congratulations. Horner was then kicked out of the team. The Austrian side of the business won, but Marko did not get what he felt like maybe was his justified reward because Mintzlaff kicked him out anyway. So, yeah, obviously lots of drama at Red Bull, but he is one of the top guys. I mean, been one of the top guys for some time, but he effectively calls the shots at Red Bull nowadays, especially with Marko and Horner out the door. And he says in 2026, we could even be the second or the third best team, but nobody knows. It's not about the engine, not just about the engine, but also about the chassis. But his assessments that, oh, well, we could even be the second or the third best team. So, what does that imply, right? It's not exactly what Max Verstappen will want to be hearing, especially because there's a general feeling right now that one of the reasons why Red Bull committed so strongly to 2025, brought all the upgrades they did, gave Max the best machine that he possibly could have had. Gianpiero Lambiase had some personal things going on, but he elected to put that to bay to come out to Qatar and all the other races with Max to help support him and all of that type of stuff. They committed a lot, Red Bull, to try to win last year's championship. They got very close. It was very impressive, but in the end, they lost on both counts. And there is a feeling that maybe they did that because next year the expectations are not high. And especially this is true when you ask Raymond Vermeulen, who's Max's manager, representative, whatever, because, look, he says the engine, yeah, it's fine. They've told us it's all fine. They speak well to us about the engine, but what actually is good? I don't know what the point of reference is. We are in for a very complicated year. So, yeah, it's not exactly all sunshine and rainbows. You've got the top guy at Red Bull basically saying, well, we could be second or third. And to be fair, if they were second or third in the constructors, that might be enough for Max to win, right? We've seen that before. But that's the problem, because if Red Bull are already kind of admitting that they're going to be behind Mercedes, or obviously even the Mercedes conversation is interesting because you would think maybe McLaren are the team to beat in that circumstance, given what they've done with that Mercedes power unit over the last few years. But look, with such a massive reset, you've got to think that Mercedes have an excellent opportunity here to get back to the top. It seems that Red Bull expects that, to be honest. The question for Red Bull and for Max is, okay, how close can Red Bull be for Max to give them an opportunity, right? Look, I would absolutely love a Verstappen-Russell title fight next year, or a Verstappen-Leclerc, a Verstappen-Hamilton, Verstappen-Alonso, I don't know, who knows. It's a better championship when Max is in the hunt, as we found out this year. When Max has an absolutely dominant machine with an uncompetitive teammate, it's no fun. He just wins. We saw that in 2023. But if Max is in machinery which is just about good enough to be competitive, and he has a great battle with a driver like a Russell, as I say, and like the other names that I just mentioned, then obviously the McLaren boys also applies to them as well, but we saw that this year, so that's why I didn't mention those guys. But look, Verstappen, Russell would feed families. Verstappen, Leclerc would probably feed families as well. So I'm hoping that Red Bull get it right to some degree, but it just feels like based on what they are talking about, especially concerns about reliability, the team saying that, well, maybe we could be seconds, and then Verstappen's manager saying it's looking like a complicated year, probably not a great sign for their potential this season. Now, Mintzlaff also went on to say, for me, there is no doubt that Max Verstappen will end his career at Red Bull, but I think that's maybe relatively optimistic thinking with the way that things currently stand, especially if next year's car isn't all that great. Yeah, Max has a contract until 2028, but realistically, there are other teams that are going to be crowding around him looking for that signature. So intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Just one final thing, we have talked about some driver ratings over the last few days. This is what the Autosport guys put together in terms of their driver rating. So they've gone, I mean, Doohan's not even on here, but they've gone Tsunoda, Colapinto, Stroll, Bortoleto, Lawson, Hamilton, Gasly, Albon, Ocon, Behrman. That's your 20 to 11. Then the top 10, I mean, it's also worth saying here that a lot of these are very, very tight. So from Hamilton even up to like Antonelli, it's an even sight. It's all super marginal in terms of the votings. But the way that this is done is looking at the rating of every single race this season and then averaging them out. So the intention of this is to eliminate a level of recency bias and simply in average performances this season, what does it look like? Again, I would dispute some of these. I would probably do things slightly differently. But I think it's interesting looking at the averages because Verstappen scores an 8.25, which is way above anybody else. Then below George, it's a big drop-off down to Alonso, Hülkenberg, Hadjar, Sainz, and then Antonelli. But pretty much all of those are very closely matched, even, as I say, down to as low as Hamilton. And then who obviously didn't have a great season. And then Russell, Norris, Leclerc, Piastri, Verstappen. I think that is the clear top five, and I think that it is clearly defines in the right way. But I don't necessarily agree with the order. Like, I think Max should be first. As I've said, I think I would have Russell as seconds. Again, he's fifth here, but he's only 0.2 of a rating point off seconds. I think having Piastri above Norris, I think this is the big debate, isn't it, really? You can say what you want about Leclerc and Russell and where you'd put them, but it's this Piastri versus Norris thing which to me is very interesting because some would argue Piastri was better this season. But I think in order to argue that, you have to very much align heavily with the concept of McLaren favoured Lando very heavily, and as a result, that's why there was such a performance differential, even to such an extent that they sabotaged Piastri. I think you have to believe that if you're going to say that Piastri was actually better this season, because as far as I see it anyway, they had the same car and Norris scored more points and had worse luck. Like, it's undeniable that Norris is at least the luck factor. Say what you want about the sabotage or whatever, the favoritism factor. You know, that's a debate that can be had. But if you look at it from the surface level, I find it difficult to argue that Piastri was better than Lando this year. Yeah, look, Lando also had his off weekends, but yeah, Piastri had Baku. I mean, even you go back to a race like Melbourne, maybe there was some misfortune in that, but still, the reality is what the reality is. And his average finishing position was substantially worse than Lando's. Lando had a number of second places, and like Lando was taken out of the sprint by Piastri. That was 6 or 7 points gone. He was disqualified, not of his own doing, in Las Vegas. That was 6 points he would have gained over Piastri gone. That makes it 12. And he was, obviously his engine blew up in Zandvoort. That was another 18 points. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, there's probably 30 points there that he would have, you know, he lost to Oscar because of luck. And you can look at other factors in the season, such as the events in Monza, where he gained points back because of Papaya rules and all this stuff. So, you know, it's a matter for debate for sure. But I do find it interesting when I see assessments that Piastri was better than Norris this season, because I'm not sure that I personally see it. But intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.